The Voting Rights Act, passed in 1965, was meant to prohibit racial discrimination in voting. Yet many minority voters argue systemic racism still plagues the United States electoral process. The late Congressman John Lewis was one of the critical leaders of that fight, alongside the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The Black Voters Matter Fund aims to continue Lewis's legacy to ensure minorities' freedom to vote without issue. LaTosha Brown joins me now. She is the co-founder of the Black Voters Matter Fund. She attended the vigil for John Lewis in Alabama over the weekend. LaTosha, thanks for being with us again on Red and Blue. First, for people who are not familiar with your group, what exactly is the Black Voters Matter Fund and what led to its founding?
So we are a power building organization. We were founded in 2016. Cliff Albright and I, the other co-founder, had been doing work for a number of years in Alabama. I'm a native of Alabama, from Selma, Alabama. And in the same spirit of John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, of the work that they did in the voting rights movement, we also, as young organizers and activists, wanted to continue to work in that legacy. So for a number of years, we've been doing voter work. But in 2016, we felt like it was really critical that we engage communities at the local level, that part of what we see and we think that will strengthen democracy in this country is being able to build the capacity of community-led organizations on the local level. And so we are working in 11 states where we support Black-led grassroots groups in those states. We're working with 150 to 200 organizations at all times. We help build their capacity by investing in them, working as strategic partners, and providing tools and resources, and also in terms of how we look at culture and using that in a narrative about who Black voters are and our power, and how ultimately we want to advance democracy and open up the process for free and fair elections for all of us.
LaTosha, I want to talk about Georgia's primary in June. You were one of many voters in Atlanta who waited several hours to cast an in-person ballot. How did your experience compare with what took place at polling stations in predominantly white neighborhoods?
You know, it was night and day. I got up early that morning, went to my polling site. I waited in line for 3 hours. It was actually really nerve-wracking because in light of COVID-19, to stand in line that long, that was the first time I had actually gone out in the public in that way. And standing in line, I had all kinds of concerns around that. It took about 3 hours to vote, and then we were actually going on the north side of town, which is predominantly 98% white polling place. And I get there to assist a voter, a high-profile voter that wanted us to accompany them. And there was no line, there was no wait, there was no, it was just like seamless. And then we found out, we got another phone call from another polling site, was a majority white polling site, no problems whatsoever, in and out voters. However, once leaving that site, I go back to the south side in Metro, in Atlanta. And at this polling site, which was Adams Park, people had been in line. At this point, it's 1 p.m. People had been standing in line for over 5 hours. That ultimately, even the machines had not been online at 12 o'clock until 12 o'clock that day. And so what we saw is a major difference between what was happening in predominantly white polling sites and what was happening in predominantly Black polling sites. And I myself actually experienced that. Even later that evening, after 10:30 p.m., I get a phone call that there were 300 African-American voters waiting at a polling site. And so it was up. And so we went out, my organization, other organizations, like the Georgia Project, ACLU, and others, we went out to really be able to comfort and boost the morale of the voters that were standing out there, and really just talk. And we gave them pizza and water. The last voter, where we were in Union City, the last voter actually voted on Wednesday because technically it was 12:37 when we were at that polling site. So it was just a major difference in the voting experience that we saw in predominantly African-American polling places and what we saw in white polling places in the metro Atlanta area.
It really sounds like such a stark contrast. We only have a couple minutes left, but what is the Black Voters Matter Fund doing to prevent what happened in Georgia in June from happening nationwide in November?
So we're doing a couple of things. So one, we're working in 11 states deeply and 15 more broadly, but we're doing a lot of voter education. We think it's really important. There's a lot of information, misinformation, and because of COVID-19, people have to vote differently. So we've got mail-in ballots and absentee ballots. So one, we're doing a lot of voter education. Secondly, we're also monitoring and really making sure that we're recruiting people to vote as poll workers to work at the polls, also as poll monitors. And we're working even with some of our legal partners like ACLU, where we actually have filed a lawsuit against the state of Georgia around postage. And then the fourth and the final thing is we're organizing. We're organizing those grassroots groups to actually be on the front line to really get people to vote early, get people to get the right and correct information, and also monitor the process and be able to document as people have problems.
All right, LaTosha Brown for us. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.